The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā tātou katoa, I'm Toby Manhire, welcoming you back to Gone By Lunchtime in 2020, which is election year. Annabelle Lee Mather, how does it feel?
Like it went really, really quickly. Both the summer and the election cycle.
Right. How was summer, more importantly?
Summer was amazing. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm quite brown.
You
looking
look
very
stunning.
ngai tahu.
Stunning. Much like Ben Thomas, who has a massive jar of water. He's like he looks a bit like Winnie the Pooh with his big jar of honey.
I'm hydrating.
How was your
fad
summer,
diet.
Ben?
I'm drinking lots of water and I'm smoking twice my normal amount to keep my appetite down.
He's a true young pooty.
I'm on my way to a healthier lifestyle.
And you've spent the summer. I assume, Ben, you've spent the summer just going into bookshops and turning around books. I believe that's the thing to do.
Left no bookstore unturned, no warehouse bargain bin sale. Just wherever I see the smiling face of our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, I'm just driven by a compulsion beyond desire or urgency or need to just like turn it face down or around.
To explain what Ben is talking about, for those of you who have interesting and fulfilling lives, there was was it sort of around the Christmas period or before Christmas? There was a campaign of some people on Twitter to turn around the Michelle Duff book about Jacinda Ardern and the Australian Women's Weekly, I think.
This is because the Prime Minister's eyes follow you around the room.
Right.
You know, so obviously they felt a bit nervous. They feel unsafe in Unity Books and are just like, keep it to yourself, PM.
I'm not sure that Unity Books was necessarily a hotbed of Turn Ardern, but did you manage to
I feel like it's more of a Dimmicks thing, isn't it?
Dimmicks?
That's where you'd go to Turn Ardern or Whitcoulls, not really Unity.
Maybe Paper Plus? All good bookshops, especially good bookshop is Unity Books, who support our book section. And listeners, Flick Electric, who don't sell books but do sell power, including to you. You can look at Flick by clicking through on any post in the politics section.
Hard to read a book in the dark.
Wow, beautiful. Oh, that's beautiful. Have another jar of water. The book theme is a kind of big one. Because we've got books coming this year from some of New Zealand's leading political razor-sharp minds, including Golriz Garaman of the Greens, Judith Collins of the National Party, and Madeline Chapman of the Spin-off, who is in a wonderful throwback to the old days, recording and sound engineering and producing and very much conducting this podcast, aren't
It
you,
says
Matt?
a lot about Mad that, like, even though she's now New Zealand's foremost author, she still has time for
the little people
like
For the
us.
little
It's
people.
so cool.
It's mad. What did you tell me about your memories of when you used to produce Gone By Lunchtime?
I said we've come a long way from 2016 when I literally fell asleep a couple times while recording because I had no idea what you were talking about or who you were talking about, and now here I am.
In many ways, our representative listener.
And now you have managed to write a book entirely based on what you've learnt from Gone By Lunchtime. Is that true?
I did listen to quite a few Gone By Lunchtimes in my research for timeline purposes.
Oh, just for time, just so for chronology, not for like insights or.
No, I don't believe I quoted anyone.
Annabelle Thomas, Annabelle Ben's analysis.
I don't know if you're bound by any kind of embargoes. So just if you want to just drop heavy hints rather than answer this directly, do you have an entire chapter on Jacinda Ardern's primary school happy club?
I do not. Because unfortunately, my investigative skills are not that great when it comes to investigating primary school social clubs.
Interesting that they've gone to ground.
Could probably
on it.
help you with that, Matt. If you...
Did you did go to Morrinsville though? So we should say I suppose that your book is a biography of Jacinda Ardern.
Yes.
What's the full name of the book?
I believe it is Jacinda Ardern, all written out, A New Kind of Leader.
Hey, you might want to include this in the book. I went to Morrinsville once.
Go on.
And they have...
It's a great story.
It's a good start, right?
Might just have to be a footnote.
Okay, well, a little bit more. I mean, not a chapter, but maybe a paragraph or two. And they've got 2 knitting shops in the main street. And at the second-hand shop, they had a beautiful portrait of Rachel Hunter.
That
A
went
knitted one.
in so many different directions that I did not anticipate.
What do you mean a portrait? Like, do you
Like
mean a knitted cable jersey or?
No, someone had painted like a beautiful picture of
So it wasn't
Rachel
for
Hunter.
sale,
It was for
just-
sale at the second-hand shop.
Trumpet
20
ad
bucka,
era, like
20 bucka.
or
I
Rod
think
Stewart
a little bit,
era?
maybe early Rod days,
Early
still
Rod.
curly,
Okay,
but
wait,
no
so
trumpet.
So you mentioned the second-hand store. Mm-hmm. Does that have anything to do with the 2 knitting stores, or were those? That's a separate fact.
But 2.
Okay. Well,
That might have to be
An
2
amazing
That's paragraph
selection of
1.
wool and
knitting
acrylic.
shops. Paragraph
and then
2.
completely separate of that,
Separate
a
down the
second-hand
road.
store with a portrait of Rachel Hunter.
Yeah.
Even further
great
removed from that,
place.
the life of Jacinda Ardern, our current
Yes.
Prime Minister.
Who worked in she worked in fish and chip shops at the same street?
Yes, she did.
Probably.
Well, there you go.
So
Her mum
one,
probably
really.
visited
that's
that knitting
like
store.
that's your kind of New Yorker style intro, then, isn't it? That the Rachel Hunter start with Rachel Hunter.
We've
Paint
got a
the
lot of notes
picture.
for the manuscript.
You'd
Mad.
think Rachel Hunter would be the most exciting thing about Morrinsville.
Yes,
But then
When is the book
Gifted
out,
this
man?
girl.
When's the book out?
the book is out on the 31st of March, which means you can buy it on April Fool's, which I think is very fitting for some reason. But I'm looking forward to turning my books back around.
Yeah.
After others have.
Well, it's kind of.
It
has been a very helpful promotional thing. I mean, admittedly, only to the 700 people who are aware of it. But you know, you need to come. I think you need to take it up a notch. Maybe come up with what could it be? Turn it upside down,
Or maybe stand them up. Like if they're lying down, stand them up.
Stand all of them up.
Yeah.
What about buy our dirt? Like buy the book and give it to somebody as a protest against the evil communist coalition.
I would promote anything that would maybe result in someone buying the book, whether they read it or not.
Well, that's because obviously Jacinda Ardern is a terrible communist,
Yes.
and so the best way to fight the evils of communism is capitalism. So buy the book.
The
That'll teach
commercialisation
her.
of it, yeah.
As
Commodify her.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, as retired columnist Liam here would say, you know, really own the lib by buying the book.
Shout out to Liam. We'll try and get him on the podcast at some point. He is owning so many libtards.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't You can't shout out
He's
to
got the biggest portfolio of libs in New Zealand, probably.
the leading pundit of the Manawatu region and most of the North Island. I think we'll give him the bottom lower north.
The bottom 2/3.
Yep. So the other books, just quickly, we'll stay on books. Judith Collins' book is said to be coming out in a couple of months. What's that about? Do you think that? A
lot of speculation.
It's going to be a powerful story of one, of a true New Zealand journey from farm to the 9th floor of the Beehive. I don't know what.
Total speculation, but I think people will be disappointed if they think that it's going to be a score-settling tell-all, or that they think it's just going to be a sort of bland kind of story. I suspect it'll be what you say, that it'll be a kind of repositioning, telling events from her side. There's actually a few chapters in Collins's career where she has sort of, told her side of the story and emerged much more sympathetic as a result. I think she did a Women's Day story once after she had just mercilessly driven David Benson Pope out of Parliament with accusations that he was like a child bully. And then, she did a very humanising piece in the Women's Day. She is very capable of surprising people, I think, with her emotional depth. If you recall that, there's a really interesting 2-piece interview that Simon Wilson did with Jacinda Ardern and with Judith Collins, which again surprised a lot of people. She's got depths that often don't show in public because she is so good at kind of projecting this, Thatcher-esque sort of crusher persona. But I actually think it'll be a really, really interesting read and probably the second best political book that comes out this year after Mads.
What do you think, Annabelle? Surely publishing a book, someone who's widely seen as a leadership contender, who stood for leadership before, who obviously covets the highest job in New Zealand politics, to publish a book in election year it's hard to read that as anything but slightly destabilising.
Well, it makes you think that, obviously she's trying to reposition herself and show a different side of herself. And I think, like you say, Ben, people will be surprised that it shows that despite her hard-ass image that she has a heart, and the only reason you'd put that out at this time instead of waiting until, I don't know, maybe you've left Parliament and retired, would be if, you still harbour ambitions of perhaps becoming the leader, but that you've got some work to do in terms of the public perception of you.
Yeah,
just guessing. I'm just guessing.
I think that's probably right. The other thing to think, though, is that when Collins was a minister and she was demoted, she resigned as a minister, inverted quotes. She kept very busy. She went and enrolled in a postgrad diploma at Massey University, which she completed with an A+ average recently, later last year. And in opposition, somebody who's sort of that, normally that busy and that kind of, I guess, type A personality was probably really looking for things to do. She released one of the most impressive, I think, policy discussion documents from National's raft of them last year, which was the RMA one. And, it could just be that she needed something to keep her busy, while maybe holding Phil Twyford to account wasn't taking up that much of her time.
How do you think it'll be seen in the party, though, like, to be releasing a book while you're still in Parliament heading into election year?
I think it'll depend on the content, but I don't think it'll tread on too many fond memories or anything.
It sort of depends how things go. I mean, I think excuse me, not that long ago when Simon Bridges was looking very vulnerable, and we were talking on this podcast a lot about whether or not Judith Collins was timing a run nicely, then we would say, well, this is if he was looking vulnerable, we would say, but it sort of speaks to the reality that he has sort of stabilised his leadership. There is no real talk of any seriousness at the moment of a leadership challenge from within the National Caucus, that this is seen sort of for the moment as a kind of novelty or an entertainment rather than as a the other book, and everyone listen carefully to this delicious segue, is Facebook, and that has
slick.
Thank you. That has come into focus with the sort of first kind of political set piece of the year, which is the Labour Party's now recently. I mean, they've done it for a wee while now. Their Martinborough retreat, the camp. They sort of get together at the caucus and
blow up a bouncy slide.
I think they probably, I don't know this for a fact, probably play Bore on the Floor, which watchers of Succession will be familiar with. Just me. And at that retreat, Jacinda Ardern announced that she would be running a positive, factual and robust campaign, and announced that Labour were indeed signing up to the Facebook transparency tool, the ad library, which allows people to essentially see to who you're targeting with your ads on Facebook, and roughly how much you're spending, but not, crucially, any scrutiny of the factual content. Yet there has been much talk about this idea of, in the current climate of misinformation, disinformation, Facebook, fake news, blah, 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 that Labour are going to be positive and truthful, and National are going to be disingenuous and mendacious, and that's already become incredibly boring in terms of the way it's I don't know, it's already, the kind of attack has reached a meta level where no one is really talking about anything except whether or not something is true, and it's kind of, it doesn't bode terribly well, does it, Ben?
Yeah, it was a good strategy from the government. They, want a positive, fact-based campaign. They, of course, want a positive campaign because they want to be able to portray any criticism of the government as negative. And in the same way that George W. Bush wanted to portray any criticism of the Iraq War as unpatriotic. It gives you a good sort of bulwark against, any kind of reasonable criticism that comes up.
Wow, amazing analogy.
And of course it's playing to Jacinda Ardern's strengths. She is very positive. People think very well towards her. People are willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. She's very charismatic. She has very high stats in terms of likability. So it's obvious that they would want to run on that issue. Fact-based is that's a bit more of a gamble for them because obviously what they're doing is trying to introduce this narrative that National are doing fake news, that they're doing misinformation, that they're like Boris Johnson or they're like Donald Trump. But insisting on a fact-based campaign when you don't have a great record of delivery to run on, as this government probably doesn't, you probably don't want the fact-based assessments of where child poverty index measures are. You probably don't want the fact-based assessment of how many houses were built in Kiwi Build. So that was a 50-50 call, but they're taking the chance because what they want to do is frame everything that National does as dirty politics.
I think, to be fair, though, towards the end of the last campaign, how big was the fiscal hole? Was it
14.7 billion.
11.7 big time.
Which obviously didn't turn out to be true, but it ended up taking up a lot of oxygen during the campaign. So I imagine that this is also a move to try and parry those sorts of kind of red herring issues that end up taking a lot of, time and space.
And let's be honest. Some of the kind of over the last month, some of the National Party social media output has stretched truth, at the very least. There have been some ASA findings about the credibility of some of the claims. It's kind of, sometimes I think people probably obsess about whether or not a bar graph is accurately rendered in terms of its kind of verisimilitude and statistics courses, but it gets a bit silly. But at the same time, it makes sense for Labour to try and neutralise some of that attack campaigning, right?
Yeah, of course. That's why it's a good strategy. There's no argument with that. But I think they are at risk of over-egging it. Fake news, remember, as a term, originally described, fake Facebook pages that were pretending to be CNN saying that Obama had made abortion mandatory.
Yeah.
Now fake news is, a bar graph that we don't like because it's not quite proportionate. So, I mean, there is this chance that they look like they're getting a bit overexcited about everything.
Yes. Well, we've sort of solved that, I think. For Simon Bridges and the National Party, Annabelle, one of their biggest decisions, or probably a decision that's been made, but announcement that we can expect, I think, probably in the early part of February, is what they will do or not do vis-a-vis working with New Zealand First, with whom there's been a very acrimonious relationship both between the parties and particularly between the leaders. Does Simon Bridges say, as John Key did in 2008, I think, does he say, nah, not going to do it, not going to work with New Zealand First, and go a strategy of just trying to basically have the National Party with a little bit of David Seymour along the way?
I don't know. It's hard to say, isn't it? Because David Seymour is polling much stronger than what he has in previous elections. I mean, they have to buddy up with someone. They can't go it alone. And I guess it's just going to be a calculated gamble as to whether or not they're prepared to put all their eggs into the ACT basket, or try and at least soften the relationship with Winston. I tend to think that they probably see ACT as the safer, more reliable, less problematic option. But I don't know if he's really in a position to absolutely rule out any chance of working with New Zealand First, because I imagine that they'd rather work with New Zealand First than be in opposition again. But at the same time, whether or not Winston would work with Simon is a whole other issue, and to be honest, I doubt he would. So
there is that option of the decapitation strategy, whereby Simon Bridges says, I will not work with the New Zealand First Party led by Winston Peters. However, I am not ruling out the New Zealand First Party. Ben?
Yeah, and a New Zealand First Party led by Shane Jones would work perfectly well with National, and probably better than it would with Labour.
Except that New Zealand First wouldn't clearly say we wouldn't do that, and will probably retort by saying, the obvious retort to that would be, well, we will consider working the National Party as long as it's not led by Simon Bridges. And then probably at the end they'd just kiss and make up and be fine.
I think that a halfway house solution like that isn't the best course for National. I think what
would you do? It's your decision to make. You are the most powerful person in the National Party. This is a hypothesis, might be true, I don't know, but hypothetically, what do you do? What is your advice?
Stand up, give a press conference, newly cleared by the SFO, which we'll get onto later. Simon Bridges says, we're a party of integrity. There's so many questions swirling about New Zealand First's conduct in government and outside government. We are not prepared to even countenance working with an organisation like that, and I'm ruling them out as a coalition partner. Because what's necessary but not sufficient for National to get into Parliament is to knock out New Zealand First, and if New Zealand First get over 5%, that's it. The Labour are back in government, because there's no chance that Winston Peters will work with Simon Bridges. He hates him historically because he beat him in Tauranga in 2008. These things are very important to Winston Peters, and they've had a very fractious relationship since then.
But Winston Peters has surprised us a lot over the many centuries that he's been in New Zealand politics, and he is capable of burying hatchets. He buried hatchets with straight away with Jim Bolger.
I feel like the older he gets, though, the longer he holds on to grudges.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I feel like he used to be he used to be a bit more pragmatic, and he could bury hatchets when he needs to, but I feel like that side of him has evaporated over the years, and once he's been pissed off by someone or something, he's like, nah.
just like this whole backyard is just full of hatchets, and like there's no room for any more hatchets.
Right, there aren't even any buried skeletons, just hatchets.
Okay, so if that does happen, then if you're the Labour Party, don't you go, well, we are campaigning on, their strategy is, we're campaigning on give us a chance to continue what we've started. We've made this government work, this coalition government with New Zealand First Informal Coalition and Green and Support, and we have made it work. Jacinda Ardern is the best placed person to make it work with that combination, and therefore we are going to signal, as we did in the 2015 by-election in Northland, that we feel as though that it's appropriate that we don't contest that seat. Therefore, New Zealand First doesn't need to hit that 5% threshold because they get through on what's sometimes called the coattail provision, which is exactly the same thing that National will be repeating in Epsom with David Seymour. Therefore, that makes it more difficult for them to argue that's in any way a dirty deal, and probably, not definitely, New Zealand First will get over the line, but more importantly, it means that anyone can vote for them without fearing as though their vote is going to waste.
Yeah, but the thing to remember is that a lot of New Zealand First's vote are people who would like to see them in coalition with National rather than Labour, and even if they get 3%, that's not ideal for National, but that's much better than them on 6% because hopefully those voters would go to. Some are already flowing to ACT as a result of ACT's position on the gun law reforms, as a result of David Seymour's sort of weird marginal kind of identity politics culture wars with Golriz Garaman, which attract a certain type of voter, and on both sides. And I can't see any benefit in Bridges leaving the door ajar for Peters because he's not going to come in. It would be foolish for Bridges to think that.
All right. Well, there's more to talk about that. We should also say that there are, according to several sources, going to be 2 referendums underway at the election on September the 19th, one on legalising cannabis, the other on assisted dying, and we will get to those as the year progresses. We haven't forgotten about them. We just, we've got places to be. Well, you've got somewhere to be, haven't you, Annabelle? Do you have some?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have anywhere to be.
I've got to be at my house.
Doing something else. I've got an appointment with doing something else. This it's been a strong start. I think it's hard to argue to the year for Jacinda Ardern and her government, who have been able to kind of set down the agenda for now. It's interesting, it was 11.7 billion. Just struck me that 11.7 billion is not far away from 12 billion. This is almost as good as my book to Facebook segue. So we go from fiscal hole to fiscal mountain. Fiscal. How do we do? Fiscal. What rhymes with hole? What's a assonant? Fiscal road. Well, there have been a lot of roads. Thanks, Madeline Chapman. There's a book out on March 31st. Jacinda, the kind of leader. A kind leader or a kind of leader? Jacinda Ardern. Kind of a leader. Oh, wow. That'll be it. Turn Ardern will instead be people cutting out one of the words, moving it.
I'm giving them ideas.
No, that's not. We do not endorse, just to be clear, we don't endorse cutting up books in bookshops.
Don't deface
until you've
books.
Paid for them at Unity Books. What the fuck is that? Something just fell off the wall, ladies and gentlemen.
It's a spiritual intervention.
There is a huge infrastructure deficit in the spin-off studio.
There's Jane Yee from The Real Pod, which is one of several other pods. Annabelle's holding up her head, which I believe, because she now lives in California, they hold up her head during a cutout head during the podcast. Anyway,
good episodes of Real Pod this week.
Bachelorette
because
content.
The Bachelorette
You're
started.
Into that? Yeah. Maybe that the Bachelorette. Bells, you watching that?
No, I just finished watching Cheer.
Okay. Cheers?
Cheer.
I think it's called
Maddie
Cheers.
Maddie knows.
What's Cheer? What's Cheer?
It's fucking awesome.
Okay, but the Bachelorette, they've got 2 bachelorettes.
2 bachelorettes.
Is there a way? Maybe that's a strategy in election. Maybe that's something for Simon Bridges. They could suddenly say there are 2 National Party leaders, and it would be him and. The infrastructure announcement that came this week, $12 billion spend. They've kind of loosened the belt a bit, dropped some of those responsibility rules that was signalled at the end of last year. $12 billion to be spent, $8 billion announced this week, $4 billion to go into capital spending, be announced in the budget. Most of it on roads. We'll get into that in a second, but do you think Grant Robertson probably had this in the plan all along? Do you think that was kind of like when they were announced, the 100-day plan, they got on with that, it was like basically, you know what we'll do? If everything's going okay, everything's sailing along all right, the economy isn't tanking, there's no massive, sort of Trump-driven crisis in the global economy, that we will loosen that stuff, having proven that we're prudent. We will loosen that at the end of 2019, 2020, start of election year. I can see it now. We'll be standing with a full supergroup of ministers from across the coalition support party and announce $8 billion sweet fucking dollars on mostly roads.
No, I don't think it was that. I don't think it was that exact thought. I don't know that it was definitely going to be infrastructure. But I think from the beginning, when they had these budget responsibility rules, I think they always knew that after a couple of years, once you've gained the public's trust, and more importantly, once you've got people clamouring for spending, then you've got basically carte blanche to do it to your satisfaction. It's the rope-a-dope strategy of government. You always say, oh no, we couldn't possibly spend. The opposition starts telling you cowards, spend more money. How dare you? And then when you do spend it, nobody can criticise you, even though you've blown your old budget responsibility rules. But it's the right thing to do. They managed to calm all the fears that business had, that they were under-investing in infrastructure. They've basically given business exactly what they want. They've given National exactly what they wanted, because it's a whole list of all these roads that were supposedly planned under National. There's a bit of crying going on from the opposition saying they stole our ideas, as if it's really fucking revolutionary to think of like putting a road between 2 cities or something. And and I'm sort of serious about that. Sure, a lot of these projects were planned under Simon Bridges.
It's never a strong position to be arguing from when you're like, they stole our ideas in
it's
politics.
Like, now they're doing it, and that's what you wanted. Yeah. So
these are great ideas that we would do better. That's kind of weak.
Yeah, as my friend Matthew Hooden wrote in his column today, that for some reason Simon Bridges' argument is that the NZTA officials who would have been in charge of building the roads under him as Prime Minister are not going to be as good at building the exact same roads under Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister. And I mean, it's the same as journalists will spend a lot of time kvetching and bitching about who got the scoop and who had the story half an hour before anyone else, and readers don't care, and voters are very similar to that. I mean,
Yeah.
I went yesterday to Jacinda Ardern's not the State of the Nation speech, which was billed as a State of the Nation speech by Business New Zealand and heavily advertised that way in the sort of several hundred introductory speeches that were given by their sponsors and Business New Zealand themselves. And they were loving her. Like, I've seen, I think, 3 speeches she's given to Business New Zealand audiences over the course of this government, and they started off a lot shakier. There was that we've got to ask you about business it was uncomfortable, and you could feel it at times. And she was kind of nervous this time. She was just easy. She just chuck up some PowerPoint slides, chatted about them.
A graph with the correct scale on the axes. A graph that was widely praised on left-wing Twitter.
Well,
a perfect graph.
It was a perfect graph. And yet, I mean, the package itself, Annabelle, I don't know what you think. It was very, 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 very roady.
It's very roady. Yeah, with a little bit of public transporty, bike, cycle-y way type.
Yeah, mode change, as some have said in defence of it. But for the Greens, Henry Cook described it as a massive defeat for the Greens, and it's hard to argue with that. I mean, there's $200 million or something for decarbonising and changing out some boilers in some schools and hospitals and stuff, and that's all cool. But you kind of feel as though, and they can point to some of the rail projects, but wow, I mean that. I don't know, do you feel like...
I feel like they're getting gazumped more by New Zealand First than by Labour, because when you look at the gains that New Zealand First is getting by comparison to the Greens and how outspoken Winston is about undermining their policies and stuff.
And is that simply because of the leverage, which they clearly have more leverage, and they could bargain harder because they hadn't committed to one team or the other?
I think that's part of it, but I also
personality?
I think that's part of it, but I also think that he's just a wily old coyote who, it ain't his first time at the rodeo, and it's their first time being part of a coalition government, and I think he's just been more skillful at getting what he wants out of the relationship.
And he is Deputy Prime Minister and in Cabinet, which they're not. So I guess that's...
part of it as well. I mean, they're two fairly new leaders, so...
I mean, another thing, there is a lot of criticism of, the road heaviness of this. But, realistically, I think, as I was staying down at the lake for a few months at the end of last year. And, you really, I mean, this sounds like a dumb thing to say, right? But I spend most of my time in the city. So I'm like, more public transport, let's get more bike lanes or whatever. But, vast parts of the country do rely on roads. They rely on cars. They, it's ludicrous to talk about, a cycleway between Wairoa and Napier, But these are roads that a lot of people use. And also, more selfishly, for the first time I tried the Tauranga to Whakatane Expressway, and it fucking rules, and there should be more roads like that. Just,
Well, it's the same.
Put $16 billion into it.
Don't spend money on rules except the one I need to be on immediately. Is the, I think, general position. But the broader
not
point,
me. I'd do it more generously. Let everyone have that beautiful experience.
Oh. Ben, they've brought us to tears, not for the first time on this podcast. The broader point on the Greens and whether or not they are being fucked over, though. If you look at this, I mean, Zero Carbon Act, big win, big achievement. The Expert Welfare Advisory Group, I think it was called, almost nothing. Some changes on sanction rules. Marama Davidson, another speech I went to see this week, gave their State of the Planet address, as they call it, was attempting to kind of make the argument that the battle against climate change was inextricably linked to the battle for the protection of the most vulnerable, for changes to welfare. But I don't know, what if can they go back to their voters and say they've won a lot? Or by contrast, will they be able to make the argument that, we didn't get as much as we would have been able to get if you'd voted more of us into Parliament? How does it
Well,
how does it play?
I think what they'll be able to say to their voter base is that, we helped to make sure that National didn't come back again, and we've been, stable, responsible coalition partners, and we've made some modest but important gains, and most importantly, we've been a part of a government that's starting to unwind the years of underinvestment in hospitals and all of that sort of stuff. So I imagine that's what they'll be selling.
Yeah, and the other thing is, look, the Greens for a while now, it really seems like they have a floor of about 5%. And where are those other voters going to go? I can't see them going to the core Green voter is very left-wing, much more to the left of any of the parties in Parliament or any of the parties that would be competing for that vote, like, the Sustainable NZ Party, if that ever actually exists, or TOP. So I think they're relatively safe. Where can that vote go? Well, according to former Māori Party candidate and now disgruntled outside critic Jack McDonald.
I don't know if he's a former Green Party member.
He's a former candidate, current member.
Yes.
also disgruntled critic from the outside.
And currently running a campaign for
his cousin,
Party
Deb Hacker, who's a very good candidate for...
She is.
Well, should we talk about that straight right away? We're going to get to that, but the Māori Party is on the comeback. We talked earlier about whether or not National had any dance partners. Well, they have been in government twice with the Māori Party, and although what's the president's name?
Wilson.
Shay Wilson has expressed some alarm this week at some of the National Party policy platform, but. How are they looking? The Māori Party back? They seem suddenly to have got there's lots of talk about possible candidates. They talk about John Tamahede possibly starting in Tamaki Makaurau. There's
this is the thing. So there's a lot of talk about a Māori Party revival, but and I heard somebody commenting that the new Māori Party was much more left-wing and progressive and would slot into a Labour government. And then I heard John Tamahede will be standing in Tamaki Makaurau. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't quite figure out how that all squares.
About Pania Newton as well, which seems a bit of a long shot. But I mean, the very fact, the first words you said, Ben, were talk about the Māori Party, which is a lot more than there's been for a long time, you know? I mean...
Yeah, but it's election time, so you'd expect that there'd start to be talk about it.
At this point, what do you think? Is it coming together?
I think it's a long shot, but I think they have a shot, and it really depends on what Labour delivers to Māori over between now and September. And I have to say, so far it doesn't look like a whole lot. So they're going to have to pull some rabbits out of the hat, and it'll be really interesting to see what their solution is with ihu mātau. I think when people hear names like Deb Ngārewa Packer, people get excited, but then when it's followed up with John Tamahede, it just feels like the yestermen of yesteryear. So I think that, in the absence of a really critical unifying issue, they really need to front up with some super exciting candidates, of a Pania Newton ilk, whose voices resonate with Māori. I don't think people like John Tamahede do that, or Lance O'Sullivan. But who knows what will happen between now and then, because I feel like if the Oranga Tamariki issue had broken in July, August this year, or if ihu mātau had happened in July, August this year, then possibly we could see, I highly doubt, a clean sweep of the Māori seats. But depending on what rohe an issue happened in, they could cherry pick one or two. But, a lot of, political success is about timing. So I guess we just have to see what happens over the next couple of months. But again, it'll be really interesting to see what Labour has in store for Māori over the next, 6 to 8 months.
The next week is Waitangi week, and I think Jacinda Ardern will be up there for a good few days, as she has been the last couple of years. She, in 2018, gave a speech that was very warmly received and had quite a lot of impact, in which she invited everyone to. She invited Te Ao Māori to hold her to account. She said, "Hold me to account. Don't let these just be words. I want you to hold me to account." And those were words that were mentioned directly and repeatedly and pointedly by the group of mostly dames in the complaint over the whānau ora funding, and the way that they felt that had been taken back to Wellington had tried to reclaim control of whānau ora. On top of which, the Prime Minister's office had apparently failed to respond to a letter from Tariana Turia, which seems incredibly dumb. I mean, I talked to a National MP recently about that, and I was told that if that had happened in any minister's office, there had been a failure to respond to someone who had mana in whatever community, then they would have been called into Wayne Eagleson's office and given a proper rap over the knuckles. Maybe this has happened here, but it seems incredible.
Yeah, very slow to respond, apparently. I think, in terms of the Prime Minister being held to account, if you look at the number of Māori children in state care, it's at an all-time high. As I talked about in a column that I wrote when she did go to Waitangi, the importance of kanohi ki te kanohi and, rangatira being visible. I think there's still a lot of mamae that she didn't go to ihu mātau. I think, there's certainly some issues. The whānau order one is complex, and I don't see whānau order as a flashpoint issue for Māori. There's a sector of Māori to whom it is very important, and there's some interesting stuff happening there. Like at the moment, there's only 3 commissioning bodies that service the whole of New Zealand, and if we really believe in devolving power to Māori and to communities, then it seems like only having 3 is not enough, and you really want those bodies to be more community based, and so therefore you'd want more, and you'd want them spread out across the country. And I think there's certainly resistance to that, although I understand it's something that Penny Henare is very much in support of. So there's some tension around that, but I don't see that as an issue that really unifies
the other thing,
a wide number of Māori.
As I understand it, whānau order through the commissioning agency's funding hasn't actually been cut back at all. But what's happened is that there are other programs that have been funded which are just controlled by central government that have been given the whānau order branding. So so in part it's actually just an argument about who owns the IP for what is whānau order.
Well, except there was there was a budget increase in whānau order funding, so the people who were responsible for the disbursement and the kind of decision-making around that are going to be a bit disappointed if they're losing that, I guess.
I think the latest charge was led by John Tamihere, and I think there's some scepticism because on one hand there's chest beating about not enough money going into whānau order, and of course, the more money that's used to target, Māori communities,
he's the chief
better.
Executive of the commissioning agency for the North Island for Māori.
That's right, but then on the flip side, there was a big story last year about how whānau order banked, I think it was a $900,000 profit. So on one hand, they're asking for more, but on the other hand, they're still able to bank, significant chunks of money that presumably could have been used to do the work that they want to do.
It's a very Bill English sort of argument. Richard Preble, I've been thinking.
And just quickly on Ihu there was a suggestion that a deal was very close to being secured.
Pani and Eden seemed very happy when she fronted media, and the king, the business genius who apparently brokered the solution.
I mean, it sounds like the
flag.
fences coming away was actually just a coincidence, but it had an effect of being a kind of catalyst, and then the flag came down, and there was talk of a deal before Waitangi Day. How are you reading it? Then Winston Peters came out, Annabelle, and said, not so fast. It's not as close as you think it might be, and it had that kind of grinding sound that we've become a bit familiar with in relation to the 3 strikes and this kind of
freeze frame.
The thing that's interesting about him is that he doesn't even try to be diplomatic in those situations. Like, there's no thought to undermining the mana of the government or the Māori MPs. Like, he's just like, nah, not doing that.
But isn't that
crucial?
New Zealand first? He has to, strategically. That's
absolutely.
Because just like we were talking about earlier, his half of his voters don't like the Labour government he's part of, and stopping them or being the handbrake is a really, really big part of his appeal.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's not to, but I mean, it was amazing to me how quickly Shane Jones and Winston Peters were both, especially Shane Jones was just saying outright, yeah, we stopped this capital gains tax. We did it. And maybe fair enough. That's their. So what do you reckon, Annabelle? What's your guesstimate on whether or not the Humatao the kind of deal that's been negotiated by the Kingitanga in theory is going to happen?
When's it going to happen?
Yeah, is it going to happen?
What
is it going to happen?
look like?
Well, the idea is that...
something's got to happen, so there'll be some sort of deal, whether or not it's one that makes Pania smile or not, I don't know. But, I mean, if they have been able to negotiate the return of the land, that is such a huge historical, massive win for Māori, and it does... potentially crack open the issue of the use of private land for settlements, which is long overdue for review.
I found this on the web.
Oh my God. I was just pressing your phone, Annabelle, to try and see how long we'd gone, 50 minutes, and I think I pressed a button where it did an automatic search on something. And it found this on the web.
What did they find?
It's Cora. I don't know what I said that made it. That sounded like
Quora.
Anyway, apologies.
I hate Quora sends me all these emails, and it's all like questions about Star Wars trivia. Like, it's like, why did some guy beat another guy in a lightsaber duel even though he lost twice to another guy in a lightsaber duel? And then all of these experts pile in.
Sounds so interesting. What was
Quora.com.
Why did he beat?
Shit, I can't remember. I did read it to my shame, and having clicked on it, that means now I'm inundated with all these nerd emails. Like, I'm just collapsed under an avalanche of...
It was an accident.
I hate it. The thing is, you can't irony click on anything now because the algorithm can't tell that you just hate clicking. It thinks you're genuinely interested in the Star Wars
Just before we
nonsense.
lose our last 3 listeners, I'd like to move swiftly on to the...
Look, don't not so loud, you'll wake up mad.
Books published March 31. The election year in New Zealand, and of course it has a kind of the political El Nino effect, returns, and so far it looks like it could be the Serious Fraud Office, which announced this week it has charged 4 people in relation to donations to the National Party. We do not know who those 4 people are.
Who could it be?
We know that, Mad, you ruled yourself out. I saw that on Twitter. You are not one of the people who's been charged.
I haven't been charged,
No,
no.
you haven't been charged.
I mean, I don't want to speak too much about it
Okay.
on the record.
Annabelle, do you want to rule yourself out, or?
I don't think I've got legal representation anyway, just in case. But officially, no, I'm not among the chargees.
I can say I have. I mean, I've got a lot of unopened emails. So, but of those I've seen, I've not been charged. Ben,
Clean sheet. Still at large.
Answer the question. Have you been charged in relation to...
No charges in relation to National Party donations.
We also know that Simon Bridges, who would say the same thing if he were here, he quickly put a press release out saying neither Simon Bridges nor the National Party have been charged. So we don't know who's been charged. We haven't heard anything from Jamie Lee Ross yet, but it does make for a potential soap opera in... It's very serious, of course. It's not the soap opera fraud office, it's a serious fraud office. It's a very serious soap opera in election year that we could have rehearsing over again. Could be more recordings. I mean, it's unlikely to make it in court. There's unlikely to be a trial in the court, but these are criminal charges. There's going to be a hearing in late February in the district court.
The wheels of the SFO turn slowly.
Do they?
Very slowly.
Very, very.
Although
very
this is a pretty
slowly.
fast investigation.
Very fast
actually.
by
Only about a year.
comparison.
I mean, I suppose they can't be making announcements like this when a campaign's underway. So I guess.
I mean, the other thing is that the fact of the announcement is, I think, significant. I used to cover a lot of SFO cases when I was a journalist. They have a very, very high winning percentage on cases. In the last financial year, it was 100% of every case they took resulted in a custodial sentence.
They should take more cases then.
This is the criticism. The criticism is that they're over selective about the cases that they take,
and their
because they
threshold,
wait for slam dunks and they have a really high threshold for evidence.
and their money threshold's too high as well.
Yeah, and so it is interesting. We can't obviously conclude anything or prejudge anything.
We absolutely can't.
But of course not. But we can just speak abstractly in general about the fact that it's very interesting that they've then brought a case, and probably the reason for that is because in a lot of these cases, very hard to show intent or fraudulent intent without significant documentary evidence. So, for instance, we've had irregular donations in the past in New Zealand that have been disclosed by donors or other, and generally the conclusion is, well, we can't, the authorities investigate and they go, well, we just have to assume it was human error, and you do have to assume that. But this is an interesting case because obviously somebody who is very connected into the donations system basically turned themselves in, whether they've now been charged or not, we don't know, with all of their material. So,
well, it was a spectacular moment in politics when all that happened, and it sort of felt like Simon Bridges, who's not been charged, had sort of survived it and almost come out stronger. But even though he's not, he's not himself at risk of culpability, it's not exactly welcome, is it? You don't necessarily need to have a replay of that running. I mean, the other thing to say about it is, in terms of precedent, is that assuming it is relating to the original investigation and not something that they've discovered in the course of that investigation, which is also possible. It could be people completely unrelated to this original investigation. But as Andrew Geddes has pointed out in his piece for thespinoff.co.nz, that would be unprecedented. There's never been SFO have never laid charges, criminal charges over that sort of thing. And then we also have no idea what will happen with the inquiries into the New Zealand First controversy around their donations. So
the New Zealand First Foundation.
The New Zealand First Foundation. So that is another. That's another.
Sorry, that was me.
That's another known unknown. Is it a known unknown? We don't.
That's a known unknown.
That's a known unknown, ladies and gentlemen. And so we'll who knows how soon we might find out about that. It's going to be an interesting year. You got anything else to say, Annabelle? We're coming under an hour. Just.
Yeah, so interesting. All of it, though. Every minute of it was compelling.
The podcast.
Yeah. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Mad loved it. She stayed awake the whole time.
It's been fun having you on the podcast, man. When's your book out?
Is it
on
the 31st of March?
31st of March.
Yeah.
Can
I pre-order it anywhere?
Unity
yes,
Books
if you
or Flick
Google
Electric.
Jacinda Ardern and my name, something will come up.
Okay.
Two great names.
I'm gonna add By.
Together.
I'm gonna be like
terrible job of
Jacinda Ardern plus Madeline Chapman plus By.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That'll pre-order.
Not By. B-U-Y.
Oh,
B-U-Y. Buy isn't buying the book.
Okay.
We'll be
Leave
back
it
with
there.
another Gone by Lunchtime podcast very soon. We'll do some more. We're going to get we're going to have a meeting and get more.
We're going to have guests?
Who us? We're going to have a meeting.
As Jacinda Ardern said of the infrastructure program, it's better, faster and funded. And our podcasts are going to be better and faster in 2020.
But not fact-based.
Or funded.
Or positive.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.